So let's take a look at miscellaneous evolution. So this just didn't really fit into any of our other topics, and so we just made it a topic in and of itself. So it's a little bit random, and definitely some names that you're very familiar with, like Darwin and Mendel. Um, but so we'll start with, so we have some questions here, and these same questions will show up at the end, and we want to make sure that you can answer them, right? So it's worth taking the time at the end at least to hit the pause button and try to answer these. So allopatric speciation. Do you know what that is? Differences between Batemans and Haldane. Uh, who discovered that genes are inherited discreetly? What does this mean? What is biogeography and how did it impact Darwin? Okay, so we start off with Charles Darwin. So the theory of evolution is most accurately described as an overarching explanation supported by much evidence for how populations change over time. Darwin studied and is known for the study of finches on the Galapagos Islands. These finches were originally from the mainland and then found themselves on the islands where different food was available. The finches had to adapt to eat the new foods to survive, resulting in the change of many of their physical traits in order to better adapt to their environment. This can directly explain monkeys on South and Central America developing prehensile tails, for example. The observation of South American temperate plants being more similar to the tropical plants of South America than to the temperate plants of Europe helped Darwin with his concept of descent with modification. Descent with modification refers to the passing of traits from parent organisms to their offspring. This passing on of traits is known as heredity, and the basic unit of heredity is the gene. So, given that this is AP Bio, you guys are all probably very familiar with everything I just said. So, it's just a review. You probably will get a question on Darwin on the exam. That should be pretty low hanging fruit for you. And Mendel as well, somebody who we're familiar with, I'm sure. Gregor Mendel discovered that genes are inherited discreetly. In other words, genes from parents do not mix and are passed on from parent to offspring as discrete units. So, inherited discretely is an important concept for Mendel. He worked with 7 characteristics of pea plants: plant height, pod shape and color, seed shape and color, flower position and color. Taking seed color as an example, Mendel showed that when a true breeding yellow pea and a true breeding green pea were crossbred, their offspring always produced yellow seeds. However, in the next generation, the green peas reappeared at a ratio of 1 green to 3 yellow. The green trait, which seemed to have vanished in the first generation, is recessive and the yellow is dominant. He published his work in 1866, demonstrating the actions of invisible factors, which we now call genes, in predictability, determining the traits of an organism. Mendel is considered the founder of the science of genetics. So again, I would guess that you guys are pretty familiar with everything I just said about Mendel as well as Darwin, but certainly it's something that can show up on the test, and so it's worth us covering it here for a second. Bateman's principle in evolutionary biology is that in most species, variability is reproductive success or reproductive variance is greater in males than in females. So his name was Angus John Bateman. He lived from 1919 to 1996, and he was an English geneticist. Bateman suggested that since males are capable of producing millions of sperm cells with little effort, while females invest much higher levels of energy in order to nurture a relatively small number of eggs, the female plays a significantly larger role in their offspring's reproductive success. Okay, so that's Bateman. Haldane's rule is an observation about the early stage of speciation, formulated in 1922, also by a British person, which was evolutionary biologist J.B.S. Haldane. It states that if in a species only one sex is enviable or sterile, that sex is more likely to be heterogametic sex. Heterogametic sex is one of the 2 different sex chromosomes. In mammals, for example, this is the male. All right, as we move on to allopatric speciation, this is a mode of speciation that occurs when biological populations of the same species become isolated from each other, which prevents or interferes with genetic interchange. Selection against hybridization couldn't occur in the model of speciation because organisms would be isolated, so they wouldn't even have the opportunity. Okay, and then we just have a couple other kind of random things that can show up that we wanted to cover as a part of miscellaneous evolution. The presence of vestigial organs in extant species, structural homologies among very different animals, and fossil records of intermediate life forms. These are all evidence consistent with the idea that evolution is responsible for the diversity of animals that we see today. The observation that organisms on islands are different from, but closely related to, similar forms found on the nearest continent is evidence of a shared common ancestor between the island form and mainland forms of the given organisms. A shared common ancestry results in increased relativity and similarity between the organisms. And then finally, we have biogeography, which is the study of the distribution of species and ecosystems in geographic space and through geological time. Okay, and then we get back to the questions that we had at the beginning. So, great thing here is hit that pause button, make sure you're familiar with all of this stuff so that you're ready to go for some of these miscellaneous evolution questions that can show up on the exam.